So today's daf is daf tes, and we're going to start with Omer Abai on the bottom of Ches Omid Beis. And by way of introduction, when you sell karka, there are two ways of selling it. One is with achrayus, which means that if the balchov of the mocher comes back and he's toref and he confiscates the karka from the hands of the lokech, then the lokech has recourse to go back to the mocher and recollect the monies that he paid, or shalobach rice. Then you like buying a jack in the box, without a price. The mocher says, look, you do your due diligence, find out if there's a shibud on this karka, and if at some point they come to be torev, that's your loss. Amar Abai, Ruvet shemachar sada l'shim shalobach rayus, and here we start on daf tes. V'yotzo aleha asikin. The word asikin is based on a pasuk in Breishis Chavav. It means ma'arim. So there are those who are claiming, but they haven't yet come to court, that karka that was sold by the mocher was liened, L-I-E-N, liened to the balchov, to this person to whom the mocher owed money. Now the question is, can the Lokeach, since he purchased the field Shalobach Rayus, at least at this point, come back to the Mocher and say to him, look, I didn't want to buy this karka that has a shibud on it and that's going to be confiscated, and therefore it's a mekach. So the ruling here of Abaye is that it depends. If the Lokeach has not yet clinched the kinyan with what we call a chazaka, because karka niknes bechazaka, and therefore the mekach is not solidified yet, it's not yet binding, yochel achzerbo. Then the lokech has recourse to go back to the mocher, and he says, look, the whole deal is off, it's a mekach tos, and I never made a kinyan. But if the lokech went ahead and he made a chazaka, and karka niknes bechazaka, then the deal is clinched, and there was no achrayus, and therefore any yochel lachzerbo, and now the lokech is going to suffer the loss when the balchov or the mocher comes and confiscates the karka. My timer. What is the reason that we protect the interest of the mocher, and we say that the lokech has no recourse to back out of the deal? The mocher says to the lokech, look, when you bought the karka, you bought it without achrayus, and chaysa de kitri savras v'kiblas. You bought a balloon, so to speak, a bag of air, and that's what you bought, knowing full well that there might be just air inside the balloon. So therefore, once the kinyan is chal, after chazaka, you can't be chozerbo. And now you're going to have to lose. What is the chazaka itself that clinches the kinyan? Michi dayesh hamatzre. And here we have machlokas Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi says that they used to have what's called gvulos. I guess you'd call it today markers. On the boundary of the karka, there were markers. So the kinyan is chal when the lokeach sets up the markers. He makes sure that each marker is in its proper place. Tosfos, on the other hand, says that that's not correct. That's not what the Gemara has in mind, but rather it's not that he does a tikkun on the gvulos, on the boundaries of the sada, but rather he takes a walk around the circumference of the sada. He had already done a ma'aseh kinyan, but, says Tosfos, until he walks around the field, he still allows himself the rights to back out of the deal. The Gemara now clarifies. All this of Abaye is dafka shalobach rayis. Abel bach rayis, if the mechira had achrayus in it, lo, which means that even after the lokeach made his chazaka and clinched his kinyan on this sold karka, nevertheless, when the irur goes out on this field that somebody is going to come and confiscate the field, then right away the lokeach could cash in on his chips of achrayus and say, well, you're responsible, give me back my money, and the deal is off. However, Ika Diamri, according to the second lishon in the Gemara, Abai was saying the following: Afilu b'achrayus, even if the kinyan was rice nami, still the lokeach cannot back out of the deal and demand a rebate. Why? The Omer Le, because the mocher has a right to say to the lokeach, Achve tirfach. Tirfach means a shtar that is written by Bezdin. When, let's say, I come to Bezdin, I say, Ira, you own a piece of karka that's meshuba to me. You bought it from Sam, and now I want to confiscate. So Bezdin writes me what's called a shtar tirfa. Shtar tirfa means a shtar that gives me the rights to confiscate the field from you. And the mocher says, where's your shtar tirfa? Asham lecha, yeah, sure. I'll give you back your money, but first produce the shtar that Bezdin came to the absolute conclusion, weighing all the evidence, and issued a document indicating that this karka is meshuba to the Balchov, in this case to me, and I have rights now to take away the karka based on the shtar tircha. But if you, the lokeach, have no shtar tircha, then we have no proof that the karka will eventually be confiscated from your possession. Maybe 1,000,001 things could happen, and at the end of the day, you will be a satisfied customer having purchased the karka, which we can't take out of your reshus. Now, this Gemara that we just learned is sort of like a separate piece unto itself, and at this point, the Gemara is going back to Daf Zayin. And on Daf Zayin, the Gemara had postulated a contradiction in two psukim about a mazik and a nizak. And the issue revolves around the following question: can the mazik pawn off a lower type of compensation? What do I mean? The nizak wants to get the best of the best. That's called meitav. And the Torah, in fact, says, addressing the mazik, meitav sadeu, meitav karma yishalem. He's got to give up the best, which is called by the Gemara idis. Another pasuk says, Bala bar yishalem kesef yoshiv lebolav. The word yoshiv is a ribui to include shava kesef ki kesef, which would mean that the mazik could pawn off onto lokeach anything that has some value in the market. It could be, a bunch of old shmatas. I don't know. Maybe he could sell, he could sell brand. If he has bundles and bundles of brand cereal, he could sell it on the market. And Yoshiv seems to indicate that the mazik has that option. He can shove off to the nizak, shava kesef, and that's derived from Yoshiv. Let him send him brand. Rav Huna Amar o kesef o meitav. How do we reconcile these two psukim? By saying that the mazik could give the nizak either kesef or meitav. What does that mean? So Rabbeinu Chananel has one pshat, and Rabbeinu Tam, quoted by Tosas Dima Maskal Rav Huna, has a different pshat. I'm going to start in the reverse order with Rabbeinu Chananel. Rabbeinu Chananel says the following: L'chatchila, the mazik has to give kesef, and that's the ideal option, and that's what we're going to force the mazik to do. V'haya, in a situation where the mazik has no cash, he has no liquid assets, then he's allowed to pawn off karka to the nizak, but he has to give him meitav, the best karka. Again, whether it's the best karka on the market or the best karka that he has amongst all the karkos, that's a sugi Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva back on Daf Ches. But be that as it may, Rav Huna now is going to reconcile these two psukim, and when the Torah says meitav, it's talking about a situation where the mazik has no kesef, and therefore Yoshiv will not apply. Later on, the Gemara is going to say that Yoshiv has a broader meaning, but right now the Gemara thinks that Yoshiv could be fulfilled with kesef. So that's Rabbeinu Chananel. Rabbeinu Tam, however, says that the mazik could give either kesef or karka meitav. And it's only if he doesn't have neither kesef in his bank, nor does he have any possession of karka, then he can pawn off onto the nizak subin. Subin, again, as I said, is bran cereal, which is a metaphor for the lowest kind of shava kesef. So just to summarize, whereas Rabbeinu Hananel would say that the ideal situation l'chadchila will force the mazik to pay kesef if he has, the fallback position is to give karka meta. No mention of subin in the framework of Rabbeinu Hananel. Rabbeinu Tam, on the other hand, says that if all things are equal, then we're going to collect karka meta. But if he doesn't have neither kesef nor karka meta, in that scenario, then he pays with subin. Eisvei Rav Nachman Rav Huna, we have a brisa. It says in the Torah, Balabar Yishan Kesef Yoshev Lebolav Yoshev Lerabos Shava Kesef Afilu Besubin. Now it's saying that the word Yoshev doesn't mean pay Kesef, but Yoshev means pay even the cheapest commodity. You'd have to pawn off onto the Nizak a massive amount of subin in order to pay for these damages. And that's called a Dover Garua. It's really the lowest on the scale. And that seems to be against Rav Huna, because Rav Huna says that the mazik has to pay either with kesef or with karka meta, which is idis. No option of subin. And the Gemara answers, okay, listen to this. He doesn't have kesef, nor does he have karka meta. And Rav Huna has to concede that in such a case, he's going to pay with subin. So the Gemara right away raises the objection, either lesle pshita. Obviously, if the mazik has nothing in his possession, neither kesef nor karka metav, he's got to pay with subin. What else are you going to collect from? Gemara says, "Ma'al the same amrina leizil torach zabin v'aisi lekesef komashbo." The issue at stake here is who has to go out to the market and find a buyer for subin. Very difficult challenge. Tircha gedola. So the mazik says to the nizak, here's the subin. Hareshel cholfanecha. You take the headache and sell the subin on the market, and that's your payment and compensation for the nezek. On the other hand, the nizak says to the mazik, as we say in Yiddish, tut mir a teva, do me a favor and go out and sell the subin. It's not my headache. And Kamash Malon, the pasuk is coming to teach me, according to Rav Huna, that the mazik is not chayev to go out and liquidate the subin. That's the responsibility of the nizak. And now the Gemara offers a statement of Rav Asi that gives us sheds another light on ksofim and karka. Amar Rav Asi, ksofim arein karka. Very vague statement. What is the substance of this statement equating ksofim with karka? The Gemara is bothered by the fact that Rav Asi seems to be repeating exactly what we learned in Rav Huna. And Amar Rav Asi sounds like it's a separate statement. It should have said V'chein Amar Rav Asi. If Rav Asi is simply elevating the status of kesef to meitav, and therefore allowing the mazik two options, either to pay with kesef or with meitav idis sadeu, then the Gemara should have said V'chein Amar Rav Asi, meaning that Rav Asi just reiterated what he had heard from Rav Huna. Ella, but rather says the Gemara, Rav Asi's statement of Ksaf Maria and Kikarka has nothing to do with the context of a mazik and a nizak and how to pay compensation, but rather we're talking about Chalukas Yerusha. And let's call him Ruvain, and Ruvain dies and he leaves two sons. And amongst the estate, he has both Kesef and Karka. Now, there are a number of options. They can split the kesef and split the karka, 50-50. Or they can say, you take the most, the kesef, and I'll take the karka. The problem is going to be that if one of them takes the kesef, he might suffer a loss if it gets stolen or lost. If, on the other hand, someone takes the karka, he might suffer a loss if there's a balchov who's going to confiscate the karka. Ella says, "Shnei achim shecholku v'notal echad karka v'echad ksofim." So they made an agreement. One guy was interested in liquid assets. He wants to invest the money in the stock market. And the other one says, no, I want karka. I'm a farmer. Or I want real estate because I can invest in real estate. And what's the style today, Ira? They just knock down the house and then build another one, right? So, not al karka. Unfortunately, the guy who took the real estate, thinking that, wow, I'm getting a good deal here, that brother ended up with nothing. Why? Because as it turns out, the karka had a lien on it, and the balchov of the father, may rest in peace, of Reuven, came and confiscated the karka from Chanoch ben Reuven. So does Chanoch have recourse now to go back to his brother and say to him now, look, this is not a fair division of the inheritance. Let's split the ksofim. The karka is out. It's been collected by the balchov. Let me get 50% of the ksofim. And indeed, this is what Rav Asi says. The ozil hai v'shokil palga b'ksofim badei. This person, we call him Chanoch ben Reuven, has a right to go back to his brother and now collect half of the ksofim of the cash, together with his brother, because his karka was taken away. Gemara says Pshita. Is there any other way of understanding this? I mean, after all, you can't axe out one of the brothers and he loses everything. And the Gemara says, "Hi, brava, hi, blabra." I mean, is one of them a son and one's not? So the Gemara here at this point says that your interpretation of Rav Asi of Ksofim Arenke Karka is basically Pshita. And it's clear that it's not a responsibility on one particular of Yoresh, one particular brother, to be porea, to pay up the late father's loans. And if it's poshet that they both have rights to collect ksofim. And once the balchov confiscates the karka, that brother, we called him Chanoch, whose karka share of the Yerusha was confiscated, he has a right to go back and say, let's do a fair chalukah of the ksofim that are really left in the estate of our father. Now the Lishna Basra says we're going to ask a kasha to the opposite extreme. And the Yoresh who took karka has no right to go back to collect and force the other brother to fork over ksofim, which he had taken. And why is that? The Amrle, the one who inherited after the chalukah the ksofim, says to the one who inherited the karka, "Lo hachi shakil ksofim." I accepted ksofim, and I realized full well that ksofim has a certain element of vulnerability, we'll call it. The ganve, maybe it'll be stolen. Money is easily stolen or lost. Lo mishtal minoch. I'm not going to come back and say to you, well, give me half the karka. I took my share of the Chalukas HaYerusha in Ksofim, knowing full well that I'm taking a risk in terms of Ganovin. Ulahachi Shaklas Arya, and we made a deal. You would take the karka, and what was your vulnerability in terms of taking the karka? You also had a parallel vulnerability, namely Dime Tarfa. If the Balchov comes and collects and confiscates the karka, you're not going to come back to me and say, well, I want half the ksofim. I'm not going to come back to you if the ksofim are lost and demand half the karka. You can't come back to me if the karka was lost and demand half the ksofim. And that's the Ika di Amri. Ella, says the Gemara, let's try a different angle to explain Rav Asi. L'shnei achim shecholku uba balchov v'not al chelko shel echad mehem. What about a case of karka? That's all that was left in the estate was real estate. And they divvied up the real estate between the two Yoresh, the two brothers. Now the balchov of the father, the lender who had lent money to Reuven olav shalom, comes along and he confiscates the karka of one of the two brothers, of one of the two Yarshim. Here's where Ravasi says that the brother whose karka was not confiscated has an obligation to go back and do a redivision and give up machzis karka to his brother. And Ravasi says, ksofim arei kekarka. What does that mean? That the brother whose karka was not taken away, he has a din of ksofim. What does that mean? He's got ksofim that's worth half the value of the karka. And what does that mean? We upgrade his status to ksofim. The only thing that bothers me here is the language here is a little strange. It says ksofim arein kekarka. I would have said the opposite, karka arein keksofim. But be that as it may, leaving my question on the side, what's happening here is that the brother who's holding on to karka is getting it right, and it wasn't confiscated. He gets an upgraded status vis-a-vis his brother, and as if to say that he inherited the value of that karka, not the karka in a physical sense, but rather the kesef of the karka. Every object that could be sold on the market has a kesef, has a market price, a price tag on it. And therefore, he doesn't have to give him half the karka, meaning the two brothers, we'll call them, let's call them Reuven and Shimon. So Reuven got half the karka, Shimon got half the karka. Shimon's karka was confiscated. He comes back to Reuven and says, gives me half the karka. No. Shimon cannot claim half the karka from Reuven. Reuven's allowed to buy off Shimon, so to speak, and say, look, the half a karka that remains in my possession is worth 10,000. I'm going to give you 5,000 and Shalom al Yisrael. So the Gemara says, I'm going to prove to you that that statement and that ruling of Rav Ashi was already formulated by Rav Ashi long, long ago. He's already taught me this, the Itmar, and now we're going to introduce a three-way machlokas. Ha'achim shecholku, and we're talking about karka that was left in the estate, and now it's being divided up amongst the Yarshim. After the division of the karka that they inherited from their father, the Baal Chova, their father, comes and he confiscates the portion of one of the brothers. And here we have a three-way machlokas. Rav Omar Botla machlokas. In such a case, the brother whose karka was not confiscated has no right to say to his other brother, here, take Mos, and I want the karka to remain in my possession. No. Botla machlokas. The whole chalukas Yerusha is completely null and void. It was implemented based on a false premise, and now we find out that lo and behold, the karka had a shibud on it. The half of karka was taken away from one of the two brothers, and now the brothers have to go back to the original party, so to speak, the original estate, and divide up the karka. And as we said before, the brother who inherited karka that was not confiscated has no recourse to say, well, I'm holding that karka for myself, I'll just buy you off. Ushmuel Amar. Shmuel says, viter. What is viter? Viter is like a loss, meaning the brother from whom the Baal Chov confiscated the karka will suffer a loss. He has no claim whatsoever against his brothers. Rav Asi Omar, notel revi bekarka, revi b'mos. In other words, what we're going to do is we're going to divide up that portion that was awarded to the one brother and was not confiscated, and we divide it up into karka and mos, and one brother will get a quarter, and the other brother will get a quarter. one brother would get a quarter of the original karka, which is half of the karka that's left over in the possession of the Yerusha of the brothers, and the other will get another Revia. And Revia b'mos, right? Then you could do it a different way. You could sell that half karka on the market and split it up into a quarter and a quarter in mos. So Gemara now explains the three shitas of the price. Not the price of the Itmar. Rav Amar Botla Machlokes because Savar Ha'achim Shecholku Ki Yorshim Havu. The status of Achim when they divide up the possessions of the father is that of Yorshim. Now, the Rishonim explain that Ki Yorshim here means Yesh Brera. What do we mean by Yesh Brera? Once they do a Chalukah, then Nizbar Adovar, that each person gets his Chalukah, his Chelek, directly from the father. And when we say that the Chalukah is not Betela, according to Rav, I'm sorry, just one second. According to Rav, Botla Machlokes, it's Ki Yorshim Dami. Just one second, I have it, but right, the Yesh Beira means that it's clarified retroactively, each person got his chelik in the Yerusha. Oh, and that Chalukah is still valid. That means they're Yorshim. Now, if they're both Yorshim, the halacha is that if a father had an outstanding loan, that loan is collectible from all the Yorshim. It's not one Yorish in particular is responsible for his father's chov. It's all the Yorshim. So if Rav is going to implement the idea of Ki Yorshim Dami, that means they all share equally in the chov to pay their father's outstanding loan. So that means that if they're all Yarshim, no one has a superior position. So the one whose karka was not confiscated, he has no right to say, well, this is my karka, I'll pay you off in mos. No. The whole chalukah starts again because we made a mistake by putting the burden of paying the father's chov on one of the two brothers. All the brothers are Yarshim, even after the chalukah, and they all share equally in the burden of paying back their father's outstanding loan. Ushmuel Amar Viter. Shmuel says, look, you took your karka and tough luck. Because Savar Achim Shacholku Kila Kuchos, which means Ein Breira. In other words, we cannot clarify the Chalukah L'Mafreya and say, well, you know what? Each person has to get his right to the Chalukah. No. It's considered that each one sold a half to the other one. Reuven sold what ends up to be Shimon's portion to Shimon. Shimon sells what ends up to be Reuven's portion to Reuven. And therefore, what's the law, as we saw earlier today, the name of Abai? If you buy a piece of karka and there was no achrayis in the sale, and then the karka is confiscated by the Malchov, then we saw that in such a case, he takes the loss, because we're shalom achrayis. And chayta dekatri, savras v'kibel. Right, Abai. I was just looking to see if it was Abai. I get sometimes. And Ravasi Omar, the third sheet, the Noto Ravi, Bekarka, Ravi of Amos, the Mesafkala, he's in doubt. Ki Yorshim Domi, when the Yachim do a Chalukah is at Yerusha, and then he's like Rab, or Ki Lekuchas Domi, and it's like Lekuchos without Achrayis, like Shmuel. Hilkoch. Therefore, how do we resolve this suffix? Noto Ravia, Bekarka, Ravi of Amos, and therefore what's left as half of the original Yerusha is split, each one getting a quarter of the Yerusha. So now the Gemara comes back to its original question. Elamai, what did Rav Asi mean when he said Ksofim Arein Kekarka? And the Gemara answers Linya Meitav. Wait a second, Linya Meitav, we already had a cash and we rejected it. Hachi Hainu de Rav Huna. If it's Meitav, then you know basically Rav Asi is doing nothing more than reiterating what Rav Huna had said. Ema, therefore we have to add V'chein Amar Rav Asi. Now we start a brand new sugya. Amar Rav Zera, Amar Rav Huna, b'mitzvat shlish. Now it sounds like the Gemara is telling us that let's say you have $300 in your possession, and it's Erev Sukkot, you have to buy Lomazog and an Esrog. So you will spend for that Esrog $100 because you have $300 in your possession. And that's called a shlish, 1/3. The Gemara is going to reject this. My shlish.